Shortly after my parents' intervention into my compulsive behavior, which probably would have been classified as an eating disorder if I had received professional help, they decided it was a good idea to introduce a mentor figure into my life other than my father. So, being homeschooled at the time, I had a fairly flexible weekly schedule, and they decided that I would complete 5 days of schoolwork in 4 days, and then on the day freed, I would volunteer down at the church, which entailed tagging along with someone who had been labeled a pastor in training. And what that actually entailed was performing errands for all of the other pastors at the church. So I did that and drove all around everywhere doing such and such. And, he made a great deal of effort to make me feel involved and get me involved in what was going on. And there was some positive effect there. It gave me a sense of, feeling like I belonged, feeling like I was doing something good, and, feeling like someone other than my parents specifically cared about me. And that's really not something which I had felt much up to that point. Um, I kind of felt like an outsider um, with all of the other folks in the high school group. But unfortunately, that feeling didn't last very long. This was because at the high school summer camp, something was becoming quite clear to me. That being that I seemed to be quite curious in other boys' bodies. Quite curious indeed. And this kind of escalated in one particular incident where, up until that point, I had kind of been able to surreptitiously indulge this curiosity. But this instance, I wasn't conscientious enough. And I was caught staring too long at somebody. And I was kind of grateful at the time that I didn't get my ass kicked. But this kind of forced me to confront this reality directly, which is not something that I wanted to do. And there were some things which very quickly thereafter developed as a result. Now, I mentioned in the previous segment that I had already absorbed and internalized conflicting information regarding masturbation, and that this kind of resulted in a kind of film reel being played back in my mind whenever I felt I had failed God in that area, and that it kind of had a compounding effect. Well, that same effect was fairly applicable here as well, although to a greater degree. And this was kind of born out of a few different ideas. The first idea being that this particular sin was the sin which you didn't speak about in public. It was so bad. Probably the only thing which I considered greater on the sin list was committing murder. And one of the reasons for this was, I was seemingly sinning against nature itself. And, I considered these thoughts and these feelings open rebellion against God. So, I kind of started developing the reflex that I needed to attempt to avoid these thoughts at all costs. So I would start bouncing my eyes somewhere else whenever I felt I had looked at someone for too long, because I was afraid that these feelings would start creeping up again. These sinful feelings. And the film reel, started accumulating footage here as well. So anytime I felt that I stared at another boy for too long, I would start replaying back all of the other instances of this in my mind, in order to kind of guilt trip myself into stopping, because God wanted me to stop, because I was going in a direction which I wasn't supposed to go. In addition to this, I needed to provide myself with some kind of explanation for why this had happened, because in my mind that this was something which was not supposed to happen. Something had gone wrong somewhere in order to cause this. So I kind of created an etiological myth. So I adopted the motif that there was a place of innocence in the past, from which I had strayed into this place where I was now filthy and corrupted and broken and in need of being repaired. So that I wasn't exactly sure what I did in order to have caused this didn't matter. So, I very quickly internalized this as a kind of, personal meta-narrative, that I now had this goal to return back to this state of innocence and devout piety from which I had strayed, or had been led astray, or had been corrupted. I would attempt to interpret every single life event through the lens of this internalized meta-narrative. And it just so happens that a whole bunch of contemporary Christian music is quite conducive to feeding this meta-narrative. So I very quickly began to become obsessed with contemporary Christian music, and began to listen to it as often as I could. And I already had the tendency to replay bits and parts of songs, of music in my head throughout the day, which kind of, continue to allow me to reinforce the meta-narrative, to the point where I was kind of like living through it. And I'm going to provide a playlist of songs, which, I listen to an untold number of times and internalize through this period. So, and these specific songs kind of had a couple of purposes. The first purpose was to attempt to convict myself, of my sin, and convict myself of allowing myself to get into this place of brokenness and being corrupt. So I would essentially emotionally terrorize myself through these songs, and kind of gash myself with a whole bunch of emotional wounds. Um, in order to feel that I would kind of get to a place of brokenness in my heart, because brokenness is something which God wants, right? Because this kind of illustrates that you've put yourself in a state of humility, and you're allowing God to take control of your life, right? You're no longer wanting to take that control for yourself. And then a second purpose of this music was to provide a kind of soothing balm, to try to give me a sense of, yeah, I've gotten into a place which is really messed up, but things are going to be all right. And even if I may not see it now, God's going to make everything all right as long as I trust Him. And if a song could perform both of these functions at the same time, even better.